Well, if technology does make it possible to automate lots of jobs and increase the amount of time we have outside of work, that could create all sorts of difficulties. But if we can manage those difficulties, suddenly we'll have quite a lot of free time to have to ourselves. And I think it'll be interesting to see how we use it. It could be that society evolves norms to try to get people to contribute that time in useful ways. So there may be more volunteer work done, more care work in the community, more providing of free lectures, things like that. It could be that instead we look to people to try to develop their own individual skills and interests, and so we might all sort of study to be, musical instrumentalists or poets. But I think inevitably a lot of people will choose to not do an awful lot with their time and to lie around and maybe just enjoy being alive or play video games. And it will be interesting to see how we manage those different choices that people make. So at the moment, work occupies an incredibly important social role. It's not just the way that people earn the money they need to spend things. It's also, the way they decide how to spend their time each day and throughout the week. It gives people a sense of purpose, and often identity is tied up in work. And so if automation is going to displace lots of different kinds of work, we won't just have to worry about inequality and replacing that income for different people. We're also going to have to find new ways to help people feel like they're valuable members of society, to have a sense of who they are, and to encourage them to develop their skills in different ways. One of the interesting things about the digital revolution is that it makes it possible to communicate in many much more complex ways across much greater distances than in the past, instantaneously. And so you might think that would lead to greater dispersion of activity, that we wouldn't need to be around people so much. But it's interesting to note that it's actually encouraging a lot of face-to-face activity. And I think that that's happening for a number of different reasons. The main one is that in this new world, life is complicated, business is complicated, supply chains are complicated, and when you're working with these complex ideas, often you have to be speaking to someone face to face. That's the only way to sort of wrap your mind around the problem. And so it's very important still for skilled workers to be together in the same office place, to be together in the same city. But it's not just the work side. I think it's also, you have a lot of new technologies that make it easier than ever to find other people who are like you and share your interests, to find a mate in many cases. There are apps for that. And so the better those sorts of matchmaking technologies become, the more you want to be in a place where there are a lot of other people, so that you have a lot of options available to you. And I think probably that will continue to be the case for a long time to come. Technology is not going to eliminate distance. So when we think about the digital revolution, there are certainly a lot of parallels to past technological revolutions. It's going to be very disruptive, it's going to create difficulties for some workers, and it's going to require a pretty big government response. But there are also some key differences, I think. And one of them is that some of the ways in which we responded to technological change in the past aren't really available to us in the same way before. So in the past, when we had new technologies, we dramatically increased the skill level of the population, and we had people go and get much more schooling. And but now that we're already going to get university degrees in many cases, it's much harder to say, well, now you have to spend twice as much time in school. And if we did spend twice as much time in school, we wouldn't know twice as much. So that adjustment mechanism isn't really there. But I also think that the technology itself is fundamentally different, in that it is about replacing the way people think and about the way that people communicate and what they do with their ideas. It's not simply replacing people's sort of muscle power. And so that means that ultimately artificial intelligence may make it so that we don't have to work at all. And that's a fundamental difference with what's come before. One of the interesting things that society is going to need to deal with as the revolution unfolds is managing the fact that there will be multiple generations on the job, perhaps as many as 4 generations. There will be older workers who, in some cases, want to work longer, in some cases have to because their pensions aren't going to support them as much. And then, of course, there will be more and more young people entering the workforce with ideas about how things ought to play out. And I think that's always a difficult balancing act. At a time of really rapid technological change, it becomes even more complicated because much of the decisions that are going to be made within these big companies, where there are powerful cultures, sometimes which have evolved over many, many decades. And there will be people who have very different ideas about which direction we ought to go in, what investments we ought to make. And that's going to be a challenge to have those cultures incorporate all the different points of view. I think what's going to add to the tension is a lot of the underlying economic anxiety that may come along with the digital revolution. That, if young people are not getting promotions as quickly as they might want, they may start to resent some of the older people that are on the job. And the older people on the job may resent the fact that young people think that they have all the answers because they're more comfortable with the new technology. So it's going to be an interesting but a difficult thing to work through. As new technologies enter the marketplace, firms begin to take on different shapes than what we're used to. And many of the operations are separated. You have people who operate a platform at the top, and the people who do the job at the bottom might be contractors for contractors for contractors. And so companies don't look anything like they used to. And that creates all sorts of interesting questions for society. One of them is what happens to the gains that company produces? Do they all flow to the top rather than to the bottom? And another, I think, is what happens to the knowledge that's generated within companies. And historically, the company has played a very important role in this respect, in that it's educated people, that it's helped diffuse technology by giving all of its many workers insight into how the business works, into what the trade secrets are, and things of that nature. If you have a situation where the people who are operating the machinery, who are driving the cars for the Uber platform, are incredibly distant from the key decisions, then the knowledge isn't shared, and you get just a massive gap, not just in wealth, but in the capabilities that people have to benefit from this new digital economy. Well, as it becomes possible to automate more and more jobs, people are going to ask the question, should we always automate the job if it's possible, or where is automation likely to strike next? I think in some cases concerns about the negative consequences of automation are probably overblown. If you see something like driverless cars, people worry what will happen when the robot gets out of control. But actually human drivers are quite dangerous, and so maybe we'd get a net improvement there. But in other cases, you want to have people as a check on what the computer is doing. We've seen cases where artificial intelligence sifts through the data and comes up with recommendations that end up being discriminatory, racist, and so you need a sense check there that a human might be able to provide. In a lot of industries, I think, automation is going to create opportunities even as it destroys them. And so you may have situations where computers can produce many more of a particular kind of service, but that at the same time you will have some set of the market, and maybe sort of the very rich set of the market, but that's going to continue to want personal attention. And you can have an artisanal sector that specializes in providing very high quality, one-on-one, individual human attention to people. And it may be that in every marketplace where we see the expansion in automation, we get this kind of divergence into a mass market that's automated, and then a small luxury artisanal market that ends up being a place with high quality jobs. If you look back at how technological revolutions have unfolded in the past, they've tended to require a pretty big response from society, from government, and a change in the way things are done in order to avoid basically a crisis of one sort or another. And I think we should expect that the same thing's going to happen now, that the digital revolution creates all sorts of opportunities, but it's also going to create problems for workers, ethical problems, problems that involve concentration of power. And we need to start thinking about what we should do there. And so what should our priorities be? I think First, we need to realize that this is the nature of the problem, that the issue is not that globalization has gotten out of control or that the elites are making awful decisions. Rather, there's a fundamental underlying change in the economy that we're going to have to get used to and adapt to. And then second, I think we need to prioritize a high quality of life. And I think in the past, top priority has been just employment, full stop. Or an increase in income or an increase in economic growth, full stop. But I think to use these digital technologies effectively, we have to worry about quality as well as quantity, and making sure that people have access to good jobs and the ability to refuse bad jobs, and that companies feel they have responsibilities that go beyond simply running the biggest profits possible. If I had to sum up my view on what's going on right now and what's creating some of the difficulties we see, it would be that we are re-entering a phase of economic growth and of technological change that's going to be very powerful, that should eventually help us to lead much better, more fulfilled, healthier lives, much in the way that past industrial technologies allowed us to live much richer lives. But that we're going to have to recognize the profound nature of the change and think about ways to respond to it and minimize the damage, because there are always ways in which technology creates problems as it creates new opportunities, and if we don't address them, we won't ever get to that point where we are able to benefit from the great gains from growth.